I got Jeff Nadu from the Sit Down here on Serious and Silliness Outcasts. He's back again, talk about some true crime, organized crime. What's up, Jeff? How you doing, man?
I'm doing well, my friend. How are you? Good
Uh,
to speak to you. I had a fun time the first time I came on your show, and yeah, I hope you're well, John. Good to talk.
thank you. Thank you very much, man. I really appreciate that. Yeah, you seem to be the go-to guy when it comes to the Italian mafia in the States. Everybody, you seem to be the guy that does the most research, is the most accurate, aside
Yeah,
from.
well, I mean, I don't know if I'm the best, but I definitely have a passion. I try to put a lot into it, and I guess for me, I just know kind of where to look, and I kind of have a good feel for all this stuff. So I always say I'm the person that knows the most about the mafia that's not in the mafia. So
Right. Yeah, yeah, that's perfect.
yeah, I think yeah, I appreciate that. I try.
Of course, man. So what I wanted to do is everybody knows the old stories. Everybody knows the Gotti stories. Everybody knows the Chin stories, the Greg Scarpa stories, all the 80s, 90s, even into early 2000s. And when I interview somebody or I might get some questions from people either in my comments or people that I speak to that say, what's going on today? Is it as powerful? Who runs things today? So that's what I wanted to have you on. I mean, I wanted to speak about the five families, what they're involved in, and exactly how much power do they still have as compared to other ethnicities that have organized crime. So that's basically it. We could break down um, family to family, and we could start off with I don't know, whoever you'd like to start off with. To be honest with you, but
Yeah, go ahead.
let's start with, before we started recording, we had spoke that people always say to me, "Oh, aren't you scared? Aren't you afraid talking to these guys, interviewing these guys, and so on and so forth?" And I tried to explain to them that it's not like it used to be. It's very very different. And the guys that are out there today, aren't going to want to be bothered with somebody who was arrested 10, 20 years ago and now wrote a book or has a podcast that's doing interviews and so on and so forth. So why don't you explain a little bit what they're involved in today and how powerful they really are?
Yeah, so that's a question I get posed with all the time, whether it's on TikTok or YouTube or wherever. Now, the YouTube audience is generally a little bit smarter when it comes to this world because they're watching these videos for a reason. They have an interest in this stuff. Maybe they grew
Right.
up in that area or whatever. But you get people all the time where they say, don't you ever worry for your family or anything like that? No, I don't. I mean, the mafia is nowhere close to where it once was. The mafia is back to essentially being a secret society where you don't really, a lot of people don't even believe that the mafia is still around. It
Mm-hmm.
is around. The five families are still active. They all have hierarchies and they also have people doing things. There's still indictments. There's still people going to prison. There's still news. But when it comes to the edict that was put out about 10 years ago, there was an edict put out by essentially the hierarchy of two or three different families where it basically was put out into the streets that they don't kill people anymore. And you
Mm.
mentioned people that are on YouTube. The people that are on YouTube are people called informants. They're people that have testified against people in the mafia. And I think that the growing thought would be if they were going to hurt anybody, it would be those people. Those people aren't even being hit. In fact,
Right.
a lot of these guys that live in the same areas that they once lived in,
That's
the
right.
mafia has no clout anymore. They have no ability to hurt people. They are really a group that's been what I like to say neutered. They really just don't have the ability to hurt people, and that's I think one of the reasons they've lost power. It's not just that extortion went away or unions went away. It's the fact that they're not feared anymore. And I always liken it to a drug cartel. Drug cartels are extremely powerful because in Mexico, they literally have the ability to kill anybody, anytime, anywhere, any place. They have no reason or ethics to anything. They will kill women, children, politicians. It really doesn't matter. So they have a certain level of fear and propaganda they can put out to people. The mafia can't do that. The mafia knows damn well they can't hurt anybody. Most of these guys, and I think the big common theme that you hear tonight is, the age. The time is an essence of essence for the mafia. Most of the members are 70 years old or older.
Wow.
And a lot of these guys, they don't want to die in prison. They've spent 15, 20, 30 years in prison. You look at a guy, for instance, you mentioned the name Gotti. You look at a guy like Gene Gotti, John Sr.'s brother, the only one of the only remaining brothers left in that family. You got to figure, I mean, Gene Gotti was sentenced to 50 years in prison in the late 80s and only recently got out several years ago. He comes back, he's in his late 70s. You know, you really think he's going to, do anything that's going to put him back in prison for an extended period of time? Now, there are several, I mean, several guys that are willing to, but the mob's just not what it used to be. There's not a lot of money in it anymore. And most people just want to come out and savor the last couple of their years of their life in relative anonymity and free. So I would reason to say that no, I don't worry, and I don't think any of us really worry because the mafia is just, they don't have the capabilities to do that anymore. And as you said, I mean, I think what I do is more journalistic, where I'm teaching people things, I'm providing news. Look, I think if you walked into a social club in Bensonhurst, Brooklyn, and acted stupid, I think they'd probably slap you in the head. But
Right.
I think as long as you don't go looking for it, look, I recognize that there are places that I'm not going to go. There are places that I don't go because of what I do. You mentioned people know who I am. These guys watch my videos. I don't think that's any secret.
Right.
But it's funny now because when I get threatened, it's generally by lawyers of these people. They'll contact me and they'll say like, "Hey, can you take that out?" Like, "Hey, my client really respects what you do, but do you think you could take that out, or do you think you could pull this out?" So it's a lot different than it once was. But yeah, if it was the 70s or 80s, I'd probably have to worry a little bit more.
Yeah, I think so. We probably wouldn't be doing this.
No, because people like yourself or even me, like, this regardless of what I do with what I do, it's not worth, my life. It's not worth, something like that. So I think I give a lot of respect to, like I mentioned, like different countries. I mean, there are people in other countries that literally put their life on the line to bring the news about these people out. And
Yeah.
I think when it comes to like a criminal element, like I always liken it to this pen, right? The cartels and some of the high end groups are up at the point of the pen, and down here at the bottom where you click the pen to go up and on, that's the mafia. The mafia is way down here.
Yeah.
They don't have they don't have the ability to do much of anything. Are they out there making money? Sure. But you look at most of the money the mob makes, it's legitimate business they're doing.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a lot different than it once was.
Why don't you go into that? Go into actually how they are making money today, as opposed to everybody thinks of the loan sharking, extortion, racketeering, drug running.
Well, look, the mafia is still doing that. The
Hmm.
mafia still does loan sharking. I mean, the mafia still does bookmaking. Now, I think it's been kind of hurt a little bit because a lot of these states, whether it's New Jersey or Pennsylvania or even New York, I mean, you know, it's not legal in New York, but you can go and do it places, and that's going to cut into your bottom line. But the mob's still in things like that. But extortion's long gone. I mean, I don't know if you've been to Middle America or even in cities. There are not a lot of homegrown businesses left, and
That's right. Yeah.
businesses now. I mean, to walk into a bodega and say, "Hey, you owe us $100 a week," it's just like most of these areas that the mob was once in. For instance, like I'll just say a name, Bensonhurst, for instance, Brooklyn. That was one point. Michael DiLeonardo said at one point that Bensonhurst, Brooklyn was 95% Sicilian and 90% Italian, which
Yeah.
didn't make any sense, but you can understand it.
Yeah.
Now it's not. It's very multicultural. There are
That's right.
Chinese, there are Spanish, there are all sorts of different people. So you just can't do things like that anymore. The money the mob does make is through a lot of legit businesses. They may have you know, uh, home remodeling or look, in New York, there's still involvement in unions. There was a recent bust with the Colombo crime family where their hierarchy was taken out. Most of those individuals were involved still in unions, overtaking
Mhm.
unions, infiltrating unions, controlling the jobs, things like that. I would also, you look into the drug trade, they're not in the drug trade. I mean, you'll see people that move drugs, but they're not the preeminent group anymore. I mean, the
Yeah.
70s, the mafia was one of the biggest groups in America that sold drugs. A lot of people don't realize that.
Yeah.
People like Carmine Galanti, people like that. That's no longer the case.
Mhm.
The people aren't coming to them anymore for drugs. Like black groups used to come to them. Asian groups used to come
That's
together.
right. That's right. Yeah.
You know, now they're not even involved with that. It's a group that just there's not a lot of money in the pie anymore. There's not a lot of ways to earn, and you know, I think what that really hurts is some of the older people. You know, I saw something recently. This was Capisci put this out, Jerry Capisci. There was an article about two guys in the Genovese family. They're in their 70s, and they got popped for going to pharmacies, getting prescription painkillers, and then selling them to younger members to push out into like Staten Island and some of the more residential areas. And
Mm.
they ended up beating the case, but you look at kind of the lengths these guys will go to earn, right? You know, there was recently a bust in New York City involving jewelry heist, two jewelry heists in Manhattan. Those were associates of the mafia. You know, just because the mafia is in 2023, they still expect you to earn, and they're still going to ask, "Hey, where's your envelope this week?" So,
Right.
you know, you got to be real creative now.
Let's discuss if you can individual family. I know the Colombo crime company, it took a massive hit. I believe what was his name who recently passed?
Yeah.
Who
So the Colombo's
Mo-
most recent boss was Mush Russo. Yeah.
That's right. Yes, Mush Russo. Yeah, okay. And he recently passed on, and there doesn't seem to be a person taking his place. Is
A
that by
clear number
design?
two.
Yeah, is that by design, or is it
Yeah.
just that week?
Well, I think in certain families, and I'll discuss this with whether it's the Genovese crime family, the Gambino family, that's by design. The Genovese have done that since, you know, the 70s. The Colombo family is just really at this point, they just don't have many people left.
Yeah.
Now, if you know anything about the Colombos, they have been under the auspice of the Persco family in one way or another since the early 70s when Joe Colombo was shot. Carmine Persco took over. Throughout
Mhm.
his reign, most of the people that have been actual boss of the family were either sons, brothers, or cousins. And in Mush Russo's case, he's Carmen Persco's cousin.
Okay.
So once he dies, you know what, in early 2022, the rest of the family, the underboss, the consigliere, high-end capos have all been arrested, right?
Uh
So their underboss, Benjamin Castalzo, he was arrested. He's indicted. He's in his 80s. You know, the number three, Ralph Di Matteo, he is quite old. He's under indictment. The main person they wanted to take the family over was a guy called Teddy Persico.
yeah.
He's a relation of Carmine, and he's under indictment, and he's actually currently was in prison when he got indicted for another charge. So, you know, he's kind of been the heir apparent. The name I've heard recently is Joe Waverly, Joe Cacase, a guy that pretty lethal guy, spent about 20 years in prison in the 2000s for some different murder conspiracies. Very lethal guy, has been shot multiple times and survived. He's also, though, very old. A guy recently got out, Tommy Shots Joeli. He was a high ranking guy for at one point. He was actually their street boss at one time, but he's just gotten out and he's kind of finding his way back in or just to regular life again. So there's not really a question of we don't really know. I would say to me by name, it's probably Teddy Persco, but they haven't named one.
Yeah. 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 I've also heard things such as they don't want you to look the part anymore either. So no more jogging suits, no more pinky rings, no more flashy cars, social clubs. Is that also accurate?
Well, you know, I don't know about fully. I mean, I think mobsters definitely look a lot more like normalized now. I mean, they look just like regular people.
Mhm.
I think you could definitely. Here's the thing. Look, if you live in Bensonhurst or somewhere in the Bronx, you know, where there's Italians, they probably don't look like any other different Italian guy in the area. I mean,
Right.
most Italian people, whether it's you're in the mob or not, you still like to wear the jogging suits. You like to wear, you know, gold chain. You could probably spot an Italian whether they're in the mob or not, but they're definitely more muted. You know, you're not going to see them in suits and fedora hats or even
Right.
you
Right.
know, the Dapper Don John Gotti suit. Yeah, they're definitely more normalized. I mean, a lot of these guys just look like regular people,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
that's just kind of who they are now. So
Okay.
yeah, I would say they're a little bit more nondescript.
So let's move over to the Bonanos because those two seem to be, and correct me if I'm wrong, the two families that seem to have taken the biggest hit in recent years, the Colombo and the Bonanos, where it's very, very not nearly as powerful as they once were. right?
Well, we just saw a recent chart. This was over the last week or so, the Bonano crime family, and they're actually they're quite built up at this point. Now,
Really?
I think what I would say is that doesn't mean that they're powerful. I would say out of these five families, the two we are talking about here are the least powerful.
Right.
The craziest family is this family. The Bonanno family have been, if you're someone that reports on this stuff now, they have been the family with the most news. They have a person in the lead called Michael Mancuso. He is a real lunatic. He's done some real weird things over the last year or two. He's actually about to go back to prison due to a Vassar violation, which is he violated a supervised release. When you're released from federal prison, you have certain things you can and can't do. And one of those is you can't associate with known felons. And he was spotted many times either on the phone or seen with people that he should not be around. So he will actually be heading back to prison. The underboss, John Spirito, who is a Bronx guy as well, they're all Bronx guys in the upper management of this family. He's also supposedly going back to prison for the same violation. So they are kind of working on, I think, a plan to kind of fix what's going to happen next. One of the names I've heard a lot of recently is a guy called Ernie Aiello. In fact, he's actually one of the youngest people in the mafia right now that's made. The youngest person I know of is like 41, 42 years old. And Ernie's 42. From what I understand, and I believe he is Michael Mancuso's cousin of some way, I think second cousin. He's kind of his pit bull, if you will. When Michael needs something done, he sends Ernie to do it. Ernie was actually one of the people that stormed a funeral home last year during a funeral. Michael ordered an individual that was shelved, so demoted and sent away. He ordered Ernie and two other guys to go assault this guy allegedly at a funeral, which is real lowbrow. I mean, that's something that would never happen. So Ernie's kind of the pit bull. But they have some guys that are out there still. I mean, again, another family with a lot of old guys. But when you look at the capos in this family, they have guys that are kind of in their late 40s, early 50s. I would say, I think long term, if you can believe it or not, they have some young guys in this family that they could be pretty formidable. I mean, whether it's little Anthony Pipitone or Ronald G. Alonzo, who's going to get out soon. They have some young guys. Ace Aiello will be out soon. So they have some guys that are kind of bringing up the rear. They might not be as powerful now, but they've always kind of been battling indictment, just like any other family, and that's no different at the top.
Does Mancuso seem to be what you refer to as the boss?
Yeah, he's definitely the boss, and he kind of had a weird run. He came up under Vinny Gorgeous Basciano during the 2000s. Vinny went away. His kind of number two or his closest guy, Dom Sakali, cooperated. And Michael was just kind of the next in line. And by the early 2010s, Michael takes over, goes to prison. While he's in prison, another guy, a more respected guy in the family, Joe Camerano, who's from Brooklyn, he kind of starts polling everyone and says, hey, this guy's in jail. I should be the boss. To which Mancuso says, well, fuck you. You're done. And he shelves him and kicks him out of the family. And that's what happened with the funeral thing. He was told to not go to the funeral. And the funeral that he was going to was his father-in-law. And you're not going to tell anyone they can't go to their father-in-law's funeral. So
that didn't fare well for them, though, right? Am I accurate?
It did not fare well. From what I've heard, Joe C is very tied into. He's a big Harley guy. Him and his brother called Dino. They're very big into Harleys, and they are connected with 1% groups, which are MCs,
motorcycles. Yeah.
From what I understand, they had a group of people there, and they dealt a real beating to the. It was Ernie Aiello, John Scriamamano, Johnny Mulberry, and this guy, John Spirito Jr., who was the underboss's son. They went in and got dealt a bad hand. But this is really kind of the state of the mafia when we talk about it. This is the embarrassments that you're dealing with. You have people that, a funeral is sacred. A funeral is something that you don't cause trouble at. You respect the dead, and you just do it the next day, right? And this is the kind of thing that Michael is up to. And look, that's not good. That's nowadays you want to be out of the headlines, not in the headlines.
Right. So let's move on to a lot of people would love to know what the deal is with the Gambino crime family. You had mentioned Gene Gotti. There was a possibility of when he got out that he was going to be the boss. The acting boss was killed by uh, what was not a mafia
No.
relation whatsoever. So why don't you go into what's happening with the Gambinos now?
Yeah, so I want to make it succinctly clear. From what I know, from what anyone that has any intelligence on this subject, Gene Gotti is not associated with the mob anymore, as far as I know.
Yeah,
From what I've heard, he's just kind of living out his life with his family. A lot of people ran with when Frank Cali was killed, who you're talking about in
right,
2019. A lot of people ran with, and it was really immature and really kind of, I think, unethical news wise to run with. The Daily News and Post put out that it was this possible war and that maybe Gene Gotti was trying to get back in.
right.
Then it was found out that it was some crazy lunatic that had a beef with Cali over the fact that he thought Cali was part of the deep state and was this like agent for QAnon, just a real weird lunatic. But this is actually a pretty strong family, and a lot of it has to do with the fact of we're past the Gotti regime, and certain people in the family really, I think, made it into what it is. Currently, the family's run by, whether or not it's Lorenzo Menino or Italian Dom Cefalu, the common theme between both of those two people is they're Sicilian. And the
Mm,
Gambino family has always had a very strong Sicilian connection. So a lot of the young guys back in the 80s, whether it was John Gambino, Dom Cefalu, Lorenzo, they're all Sicilians and they have a lot of ties back to Sicily. Same with
mm,
Frank Cali. He was very tied in with Sicily, married into a very powerful family in Sicily. And this has allowed them to be a strong group. They stay away from anything that matters. And the government has tried to bust people around Menino and they've never been successful. But the ruling body of this group is quite strong. Menino is a guy that he came up in the 80s through Jackie Knows D'Amico in Bensonhurst. Was actually involved with a murder back in the 80s, did time for that. And has been out since the mid 2000s, and he has been kind of crystal clear since then.
mm,
Um, it's funny that this family is pretty much out of the news. They've had some busts involving some construction stuff and some rackets, but other than that, they're pretty quiet from all I know. Their consigliere is this old guy, Michael Paradiso, pretty powerful guy in Brooklyn, 18th Avenue area.
mhm,
He's done a lot of time. He had said on one point on Wiretap that he killed 10 people on a list, and um, you know, they claimed it was just him talking and it wasn't actually true, but he's a powerful guy, um very lethal guy.
mhm.
I know of someone that recently ran into him just out of randomness. He saw him somewhere and he said, his eyes looked right through me. This is a guy in his 80s, but he'll still rip your head off if he needed to. And
Right, right, right.
they definitely have some guys that are quite powerful. And even some of the guys coming up, I mean, they have some real money makers in that group, and they all kind of stay away from anything that can really get them too jammed up. So they do it the right way.
So how are they making money? Is it still by um, illegal, or is it legitimate businesses?
Well, I think most of it is through, I mean, like for instance, a guy like Menino, I mean, he's getting envelopes from everybody. A lot of it's coming from, legitimate stuff, whether it's construction, unions, different rackets. There's all sorts of stuff that these guys find ways to make money from. Um, you know, we saw, I mean, even in the early late 2000s, into the 2010s, I mean, there were still gambling rings. They still have loan sharking out there. I mean, loan sharking is free money. You have to remember that, right? So if you give someone on the street $2,000, by the end of the 10 weeks that they pay the 2,000 back, they're actually going to pay you $2,600 back, right?
Right, right, right,
That's just on $2,000. So it's free money, right? Loan money is good money. Shark money, the gangsters love, and these guys have huge books. Gambling's still pretty prevalent in a lot of communities.
mhm,
It's more, but look at a lot of these guys, right? They all have and come from the legit business world. Frank Cali had a really big fruit wholesale business. He was big in the wholesaling world. There's a guy in Staten Island, a capo in the family, Carmine Sciandra. He's a prevailing owner of Top Tomato, which is like an Italian wholesaler. They sell all
right.
sorts of things. So a lot of these guys have legit things, and they find ways to make money.
So if they're making money through legitimate business, is it technically organized crime anymore?
I mean, no, but I mean, they have Italian last names and they've been affiliated with organized crime. So they're always going to be put under the auspice that they're gangsters. And
Right.
the government doesn't believe that you can leave the world of the mob. Now, do these people actually ever come out and say, hey, I'm done, not in the mob anymore?
Right.
I think a lot of these guys will tell you, I'm not in the mob. I have a legit business. I work right there. Now, I think it's partly unfair to them because there's a lot of things here that could provide that they're not even in the mob anymore. But then they get popped for gambling or something like that. And it's like, well, all right, are you really out of it? So, you always see kind of every couple of years there's a bust, right? Genoveses have had them, Gambinos have had them. And I think the guys that are doing things now, they try to keep it to the mob. Look at it like this: they'll do 4 or 5 years. They don't care about that. I'll go to prison for that. I don't care about bookmaking or loan sharking. Bookmaking, for instance, you may not even go to jail over that anymore. Like maybe a year or something. It's nothing crazy.
Right.
They just want to keep out two things: violent crime and the drug trade, because those are two things that the government are going to hit you hard for, right? You get caught selling cocaine, I mean, you're going to get football numbers, right? They would say 20, 30, 40 years. So I think they just kind of look at it and say, most of my businesses are legit. If I have a bookmaking operation, I'll try to keep it as far away from me as I can. I'll profit from it. Video poker, that's something a lot of these guys have. A lot of these machines in these neighborhoods, they're mob owned. And a machine like that can bring in a ton of money every week.
Right.
You break
Well,
a little off to the bar owner.
they're trying to avoid violent crimes, but if you lend money or somebody makes a bet with gambling, and they owe you money but they don't pay you, what's stopping them from not
Well,
paying you if you can't be violent anymore?
I think the thought is, though, that the threat that they will do it, and I'm not saying they won't. There are still plenty of people in the mob today that really have no problem sticking an ice pick in your neck or shooting you up. They just don't. I'm not saying they won't do it, but I think they'll live in the whole thought of, we are who we are. The people that are important in this neighborhood know who we are, and they won't screw us. And generally they don't have much of a problem because all they need to say is, hey, you kind of know who I am. Like if I lived in, for instance, if I lived in I don't know, if I lived on Arthur Avenue, right?
Right.
I probably wouldn't do what I do because
Okay.
I have to see them every day, right? For
Right.
instance, I don't talk about motorcycle clubs on my show because I can go out of my house and I see these people. I see
Right.
they live in the area. They could, I just don't shit where I eat, if you will,
Yeah,
right?
and they are still very relevant. The 1% of motorcycle crew.
Oh, for sure. And
They are very, very relevant, and they're still violent, and the mainstream media
yeah.
just doesn't cover
But
the news.
I just have the wherewithal to say, like, I just don't, like, it's all about geography, if you will, and for
Right.
me, I think when the mob just kind of lives with that whole thing, it's like, hey, these people in these neighborhoods know who these people are, right? They're not
Okay.
just like regular
Right.
people. So I think the thought of, and I think it's a general thought of, like, if you have 10 people that are gambling with you, you're going to pay them when they are owed money. So they expect you to pay when you owe money. And it
Right.
generally doesn't get to that point where they have to use violence.
Okay. Let's move on to the Lucchese's, because the Lucchesi family and the Genovese, they usually seem to be the most quiet, the ones you don't hear much about, especially Lucchesi. What's happening? What's happening in that family?
Yeah, I mean, they definitely were loud in the '90s when they had Vicamuso and Gas Pipe Casso running around. They were making a lot of problems. I think that was one of the issues with the Lucchesi family is they've had a lot of great leaders over the years. Whether it was Tommy Lucchesi or Tony Ducks. You even look at a guy like like a Paul Vario who was never even close to a boss. Those were clear leaders. But after Tony Ducks went away, they never really had any capable leaders coming up behind those guys. And yeah, that was kind of their downfall, putting people like Casso and Musso in control. Now, I think by name only, Vic Musso is still listed as the boss of the crime family, which is crazy because, Victor Musso has been in prison since 1992, I believe.
And how old is he now?
Vic is, I believe, 87.
Wow.
He's been whining recently about he wants out of prison due to his age. And look, I'm gonna be honest with you. I mean, I've always said I think if you're above the age of 80, I don't think you should be in federal prison.
Right.
I just think it's a waste of money. I mean,
yeah, what's the point? Right.
Vic Musso is a guy who, as they said in The Irishman when they were trying to get Frank Sheeran to talk about the Hoffa hit, they said, who's left? Like, who are you protecting here? Most of the people that Vic Musso was around, enemy wise, are long gone or dead.
Mm.
And he's old. I mean, like I said, most of these guys can't even cross the street the right way. They're not going to be out there in the streets doing what they do. And if they do, put them back in jail. But yeah, Vic's named boss by name. But from what I know, in and around 2017, Victor Musso kind of said, I want someone else to run this family. He sent a letter kind of to some of the other people, Stephen Crea, who's involved. He anointed a guy, Mike DeSantis, as his new kind of street boss. Mike's an interesting guy, really hasn't been on the street that much. Did a lot of time in the 90s for a murder conspiracy. He was in a plot to kill Little Al Diarco at one point, never happened. But he came up in Brooklyn, came up around Vic Musso. He is said to be the current kind of acting guy on the street. His number two is a guy called Patty Della Russo, another Brooklyn guy. At one point, the family's power base was up in the Bronx. It was under Stephen Crea, Matty Madonna, those guys. Those guys went away, and now it's back to Brooklyn. Now, Patty Della Russo is an interesting guy because he at one point was part of the old Vario crew back in the day, the Canarsie crew. Throughout the years, that's transferred to different people, and now it's still in Brooklyn, but it's under Della Russo, who is now the underboss. But he was at one point a part of that crew. And then the consigliere, interestingly enough, is a guy from up in the Bronx, Andrew D. Simone. He was a part of the old Tanglewood Boys crew, and he's kind of someone that I think they're ingratiating to like the Bronx group and saying, all right, you guys got one guy on the upper panel, so that's good enough. So everybody I think is kind of taken care of. They're a pretty strong group, I think. I would agree with you, and I would say that they're much further ahead than some families. They have some really solid people still around. Again, the main problem with this group at this point is age. And a lot of their guys are pretty old. And what's interesting is possibly their most, I think, lucrative group is a group of guys out of New Jersey, the Pernas. They have several sons and the fathers involved. They're pretty powerful, but again, it's all about age, and that's the big problem with a lot of these families.
And are they all operating the same way, legitimate businesses? And if they have something like video poker or a bookmaking that's extra, are they all operating the same kind of way?
Yeah, pretty much. They're all, I guess they're always going to be those earners, and the guys that are the earners are going to be out there mostly making money through legit businesses. The guys that are scraping along, they're going to be more adept at probably, doing an armed robbery or sticking up a truck or robbing a jewelry store. I keep going back to that jewelry store, but the main guy in that case was a guy called Frank Salerno. Or what was his name? No, not Salerno. DiPietro, Frank DiPietro. He at one point was a Lucchesi associate. He was very much under certain capos in the Lucchesi family, and he's a guy who, he's still asked every month, "Hey, what was your envelope?" Right?
Right.
So you got to provide, and I think those guys are a little bit more adept at kind of going after things. But yeah, most of these families are through legitimate things at this point.
Okay. And obviously, last we'll move on to the Genovese.
Right.
It seems obviously after the Chin went to prison and he passed, he was the last I don't know, big name, if you will, that the media loved and harped on, and so on and so forth. But since then, what has been happening with them?
I mean, since 1890, when these families were essentially created, right? The Morello crime family existed, which is the first notion we have of the Genovese family. Up until this very moment at 10:39 p.m. in 2023 on June 20th, this is the most powerful family ever in the mafia to this day. They've
Okay.
never had a weak leader ever, not that I know of.
Right.
Anyone that's been in control of this family, whether it was Lucky back in the 30s and 40s, to Frank Costello, to Vito Genovese, to, Chin, to the current boss. I mean, the current boss is a person called Barney Bellomo. Barney Bellomo was made in his early 20s. He was a prodigy of the mafia. Chin Gigante personally made him boss when he was going to go to prison. They have had very solid leadership throughout, and that's a kinship to why they're strong and why they stay out of the limelight. They don't want to be in the limelight. The whole notion of being a gangster, they just don't care about that. They want to be secret, they want to make money, and they want to do what they have to do and not have to worry about anything. And that's pretty much been the case. I mean, Barney Bellomo did some time in the 90s and early 2000s, but he escaped, a life sentence. Most of the guys in the upper body of this group, I mean, they have a guy that's kind of second in command, a guy called Michael Ragusa. I think there's 2 photos of him online, and one is super old. The whole thing of, if you're a gangster and as long as there's no pictures of you in this day and age, that's pretty much unheard of.
Right.
All of these guys are very capable. They have some guys that are definitely kind of problem people, people that have been in prison, but for the most part, they're a strong group. They have a lot of strong guys underneath them, and a lot of what you would call earners in this group, whether it's in Brooklyn or Queens or wherever. A lot of old school, straight up gangsters in this group.
And do they still have roots in Manhattan? Because I know Tony Salerno was in East Harlem, and Chin was in the Village. How do they still have a stronghold in Manhattan, or are they in the outer boroughs?
Yeah, so the Village and Harlem and that stuff. I mean, the 116th Street crew, which is the crew Tony Salerno was once in. I mean, they go back to the early start of the mafia. They're still around today, and in fact, all of the hierarchy of this family, Bellomo, Ragusa, and even Ernie Muscarello, who's allegedly the consigliere, all 3 of them at one point were involved with the 116th Street crew. Barney was in it. All these guys, even some of their capos, Uncle Patty Falchetti, he's supposed to be the current capo of that crew, in Harlem. They have a guy, John Brescio. It's funny, John, you mentioned legitimate business. John Brescio is a capo in this family. Do you know what John Brescio owns? Do you happen to know?
Mm.
Possibly the greatest pizzeria in Manhattan, a place called Lombardi's. It's right in Manhattan. He owns Lombardi's.
Really?
Right, yeah. Now, the acting capo of his crew is a guy, Carmine Polito, Carmine Pizza, they call him. He was a pizzeria owner as well. A lot of these guys have very legitimate things. They have a guy, Conrad Ianiello, who's a capo. One of his biggest jobs that he's had year to year is he controls the Feast of San Gennaro down in Manhattan. So these guys are all. This is probably the family still involved mostly in Manhattan. You'll see him moving around, and they definitely have people around.
How many captains do the Genovese have as compared to the other families?
Most of these families have about the same amount. I know the Genovese are pretty strong everywhere. They have 4 or 5 up in Harlem and the Bronx. In Manhattan, they have a couple, 3 or 4. They have a few on Staten Island, 1 or 2 in Queens, and then a place they've never really been that strong was Brooklyn. I know they have 1 or 2 out there now. They also have a capo down in New Jersey, but they've always been pretty strong everywhere. And again, it goes back to age. A lot of the people in this family are old.
Right.
I mean, they have a guy in this family, Albert Kid Blast Gallo. I think he's in 93 or something. I mean,
Wow.
he goes back to the 60s. You know, his brother was Joey Gallo. So,
Wow.
you know, they had a guy, quick story. They had a guy in this family. He passed away, I think, in 2011, uh, uh, called Chinky Facciano. He was this old timer. I think he was 102 when he died.
Mm.
And there's a
Wow.
story where he was on wiretap at one point. I think he was 95. He went to dinner with the acting boss at the time. And he said, hey, if anybody ever needs to be killed, you can call on me. And the boss just says, well, and that's for younger people. And he goes, well, you're never retired in this world. So
Right, 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 right. And when you say they operate out of Brooklyn or Manhattan or Queens or Staten Island, I'm assuming they operate out of their legitimate business. I don't think there's really many social clubs or candy stores or cafes like it once was. Is that accurate?
I mean, no, I mean, there are definitely people that still do. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
there are definitely guys that have just like little businesses and they're used as fronts and things like that. But yeah, I would say a lot of them have like, whether it's construction or some sort of real estate or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but yeah, I mean, I think up until a lot of them have died. A lot of these guys have, passed on. I mean, they were working out of luncheonettes and places like that, but those kind of things just aren't around much anymore. And that's just society in general. You don't really see a luncheonette very many places anymore. So
Right, right, right,
um,
right.
I think a lot of these guys are working out of like a funeral home or a barber shop or some sort of, there's still social clubs. I mean, you can go to any borough in New York and there'll be a social club, but
Right, right, right.
they're just a little bit more nondescript now, just like they've always been.
So who seems to be when you talk about drug running in New York City, or when you talk about I don't know what other kind of illegal activities, who seems to be the ethnicity that has the stronghold, or is there one anymore?
No, I mean, I think, when it comes to, you know, the drug trade, street
Mm-hmm.
gangs, I mean, they're still street gangs, but
Right,
cartels run them, from thousands of miles away.
right, right, right,
I mean, most drugs that touch people's hands come from China or Asia to Mexico and then to the United States. That's just how it
right,
works.
right, right. Somebody has to, disperse them in the United States. You would think there would be some kind of group, but you think it's possibly just street gangs.
Yeah, I mean, those are people dispersing them, but the connect, if you will, are cartels, right? There's someone who knows someone in a cartel. They might not be a high ranking member in a cartel, but they're connected to one. And that's where you're
Mm-hmm.
getting your drugs from. Most everything leads back to a cartel.
That yeah, it's unbelievable how things have changed. It seems to be that um, it used to be that certain ethnicities would work together to get things done in certain neighborhoods, and even that is kind of falling apart. It looks like the crimes that are going on in the cities like New York, Chicago, Detroit are petty, and they're young kids, they're wild kids, shootouts over street beefs and things like that. But it's nothing doesn't seem to be powerful or organized as it once was.
That's exactly what it is. I do a lot of some of the TikToks I do are on like Philadelphia and places like that where you have groups beefing over rap songs and stuff. They're
Mm,
not making any money. They're not doing anything. They're just fighting over nonsense. That's all it
right.
is.
Yeah.
100% right.
Yeah. It's on. I don't know if it's good or bad. I mean, it just seems to be a lack of direction, if that makes sense. Right? There's nobody saying, "Hey, kid, this is if you really want to do this, this is what you have to do if you want to stay."
Those old world views are gone, man. They don't.
Yeah.
That's not really left. It's kids raising kids. It's kids without families. It's kids that just want to be something. They don't think about the consequences. when you would join the mafia back in the day, you would be born into it. Your father was in it, your uncle was in it, and you were schooled how to do it the right way. Those kind of things are gone. I mean, even back in the day, whether it was a black organized crime group or a Asian or whatever, there was some sort of ethic to it. Not anymore.
Yeah, it's seems to be the real gangsters are the politicians now. It seems to be who they are. They kind of get away with everything, right? Well, listen, Jeff, man. First of all, you are an absolute organized crime guru. I can't
I
believe
try.
how I can't. Yeah, you obviously do a great job, man. And anybody who hasn't heard of your podcast, The Sit Down, it is extremely, extremely informative, and you always stay on top of what is going on currently, which is the most interesting part because, like I said at the beginning, everybody's heard of the old stories already. And what's funny is those old stories still get a lot of views and hits and so on and so forth. People love hearing about it, right? But when it comes to your podcast, it's special because somehow you're able to keep your finger on the pulse and know exactly what's going on, or at least somewhat being accurate of what's going on in the organized crime within New York City and within the United States to begin with. And it's a testament to how hard you work and how your channel has grown. So I just want to say thank you again for coming on, man. It's always a pleasure when you come on because I always learn something new. You know, people think I know a lot about it. Like, nah, you gotta go to Jeff's channel, man.
I appreciate that. I thank you for having me. Yeah, I just, it's something that I enjoy. I like to talk about, and there's not a ton going on currently, but I try to keep people up to date with it. If there's something that comes out, I'll definitely talk about it. But my channel's always kind of been a history show, but I'm glad that we've been able to provide some of the other stuff. And I always thank you for having me on, John. Thank you.
Of course. Do you think that this craze of organized crime on YouTube that people love to watch, do you think it'll ever die? Because a few years back, I said, it's not going to last, it's not going to last. But no, it seems to people absolutely love it.
Yeah, I don't think it's ever going to die. I mean, I think it'll kind of peter out and kind of get kind of one level. But I think anytime you have these new people coming in telling stories, I think when people like me stop doing it, then there can be a problem. But no, I also will say though, I don't think it's a huge genre either. It's I think you're only tethered to certain things. Like I think one of the things I wish I would have did was maybe make it more than just a mafia channel, just due to the fact that there's so much more to organized crime than just the Italian mafia. But
right.
No, I think there's always going to be, people that are interested in it. People watch the films and they want to learn more about the stories and some of the real people behind it. And then it delves into other things. So
that actually
no,
gives me an idea. Let's
yeah,
let's talk right after we're done here, which we're pretty much done. But that gives me a really good idea. But Jeff, I just want to thank you. Don't go anywhere because we're going to discuss some stuff right afterwards. But once again, thank you very much on short notice. You're a great dude, man, and your podcast is fantastic. It's The Sit Down. Go watch it. Go listen to it. It's fabulous.
I appreciate it. Thanks, John.
You got it, man.